Good morning. Okay, so I am one of those people who always freaks out when I get up in the beginning. I'm serious. And I was telling the people in my workshop yesterday so a couple of weeks I was in Florida doing a workshop, and William White, the addiction recovery researcher, was there. And as I was talking, I was chewing gum, and I thought I just started psyching myself out that my gum was choking me out. So as I'm talking and people are sharing, I'm just going into my mind, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And I'm just analyzing the whole thing, and I'm like, this is ridiculous, just swallow it. So in order to get over my nerves, I like to start my presentations with a little dance off. So we are gonna hit it in the back. If everybody could stand, we got 60 seconds. Let's move. Woo! Yes. When you're short on your dough, you can stay there. And I'm sure you will find many ways to have a good time. Woo! Ready? Here we go. It's fun to stay at the YMCA. It's fun to stay at the YMCA. All right, let's rock it out. Woo! You can hang out with all the boys. It's fun to stay at the YMCA. It's fun to stay at the YMCA. All right, thank you so much, you guys. Woo! Shake it off, indeed. Okay. Thank you so much, you guys, for humoring me. Let me just get my notes up here real quick. Okay, there we go. Okay, so my name is Shannon Egan, and I am a woman in recovery. I have not had anything to drink or any type of mind-altering substance since January 5th of 2011. Thank you. So it's kind of weird. That means in January of this year, I'll have 7 years in recovery. So that's kind of amazing. So I'm also an author. I'm a marketing and communications specialist, and I am a grant writer for addiction recovery organizations, and I am a cosplayer. How many of you know what cosplay is? Okay, we're going to be talking about that a little bit more. Okay. Okay, here we go. Okay, so I'm going to be talking on creativity in recovery for optimal health and well-being. This is the flow of the presentation. I'm going to give you guys a quick intro. We're going to talk about trauma and creativity, talk about creativity, intuition, and imagination. And then we're going to look at a case study on creativity and recovery, which is really my story. And then we're going to look at some of the creative gaps in the movement and have a call to action and see how we can have more creativity in our peer programs, in our grant writing, in our fundraising, and things like that. And I'm not sure if we'll have time. If we have time, if I talk too fast, then we'll do a creative wellness practice that can be fun. Okay. But before I actually begin, I do want to say thank you so much for having me. Whether you know this or not, North Carolina is actually on the leading edge of the recovery movement. As a grant writer, so I get to consult for organizations all throughout the US, and I get to travel and I get to go to their states. And North Carolina is actually one of the states that I look to when I'm developing peer programs. What is North Carolina doing? So you may not think that. You may not think that you guys are leaders. But in comparison, in Utah, Utah is where I'm from, by the way. So in Utah, where I'm from, we have 2 recovery community organizations. We may have 3 now, but I think it's around there. And our peer support specialists, we probably have about 200 throughout the state. And I was in a training yesterday, or workshop yesterday, on the peer support work that you guys are doing here. And I think the numbers that I saw, you had about 840 peer support specialists in 2013. And today you have, I can't remember the number, it's almost 3,000, right? almost 3,000 peer support specialists. That is amazing. So really, let's give you guys a round of applause for what you do and being such a great example to the rest of us. Okay, so I'm going to go back really quickly. So the reason why I decided I wanted to start talking about creativity and recovery is because when I first came into the recovery movement, I had 2 years sober. I had never told my story in a public forum, and the only time I actually shared it was when I went to the judge for my felony DUI and had to explain myself for my sentencing. So I wasn't somebody who had been part of a fellowship. I wasn't somebody who was active in service work. I was really doing my own kind of self-discovery and self-healing and meditating and a lot of creativity. So when I came to a recovery community organization in Utah called USERA, I started meeting a lot of other people in recovery. And they were all part of the fellowship. And one of my great friends, who is a diehard NA person or member, she said, oh, come on, we're going to go to a meeting. And I was like, well, what do you mean? I don't go to meetings. And she's like, what do you mean you don't go to a meeting? What's your recovery? And I said, I guess it's creativity. I didn't know how to put this into words so that people could understand. She's like, that's not real. You can't claim creativity as a path. People just weren't saying that. They weren't talking about it. It wasn't, understood. And so I really wanted to find a way to explain and show people how creativity helped me heal in my recovery. And the reason why I became so passionate about talking about creativity is because of trauma. So now if we look at the statistics here, the National Institute of Health says that 70% of people throughout the US have had a traumatic event in their life at one point. And they say that 50% of that 70% are still dealing with stress symptoms from the original event. And what I thought was interesting about that statistic is that have we ever considered that recovery, when we hit rock bottom, is actually a traumatic event? And for those of us who have hit rock bottom, could we say then that everybody in recovery who's had a rock bottom has experienced trauma? So if 100% of us in recovery, and this is just to give you an example, have all dealt with trauma, 70% of our population, I'm so sorry, it's 50% of us might still be experiencing symptoms from that original event. And this is what I was discovering as I became a consultant for the recovery movement, that the majority of our peers are still in survival mode. So when we experience trauma, we go into survival. And I don't know where I put my glasses. I'm going to see. Okay, so survival mode is the automatic response to the body, or is the automatic response that you have when you have trauma. When we're in survival mode, we're experiencing fear, panic, grief, and we're kind of stuck there. We're just repeating that cycle over and over again. According to the World Health Organization, people are more likely to suffer from and or develop a range of mental health problems and disorders during and after an emergency situation, while others may simply experience psychological distress and carry that forward. And some of those symptoms of survival mode are depression, physical pain, anxiety, panic, being on guard, jumpy insomnia, having nightmares, and things like that. Irritability and anger is a big one. It's okay. I think that was the smallest slide that I had, hopefully. It might be in the backpack down there. Thank you, Jimmy. So I wanted to share with you about my rock bottom because it was certainly a traumatic event for me. These are my first two mug shots here. When I started drinking, actually I'll get into that a little bit more, but at my rock bottom, these are my last two mug shots. Thank you so much. Yay! So at my rock bottom, I had a felony DUI. It was my third DUI in a 10-year time frame. So in Utah, that meant it was going to be, oh my gosh, this is so much better. I can actually see you guys. Oh my gosh. No wonder I was like all disoriented and stuff. Okay. So my last DUI was a felony. And my lawyer, who was a family friend, he was also in recovery, he said, Shannon, I just did a case for a woman who had 3 DUIs, and she was a mother, and the judge gave her a year in jail. And I had been traveling the world and working as a writer for the UN based in Africa and New York City. And so this was this was a horrific thing that I was having to face. But I do remember sitting in the jail cell when I was arrested. I had crashed a car into a ditch. I had blacked out behind the wheel. And I awoke, and I'm driving, or I see in front of me that I'm going into another car. And I swerved and ended up in a ditch and thought, okay, I gotta flee the police now. This is like serious. And I mean, all of that's going through my head, and they came to get me, and I'm like in the back of the cop car kicking and screaming. I was just like, you know, I was a true alcoholic that could not see myself in this. It was everybody else. So when I came to, I woke up in the jail cell and had this conversation. I remember thinking, okay, I'm really an alcoholic and I really need help, and I'd never thought that before. I thought it was everybody else. But I do remember saying to myself, okay, I'm gonna sober up, but as soon as I get out, I'm gonna call my friend and have him bring me a bottle, and that's, after I drink that, then I'm gonna sober up. And it was like a legit plan. So having to deal with those types of life-threatening cravings in a moment that meant do or die, that was true trauma for me. I had a hard time recovering from that. The first 6 months, I felt like I was constantly in a loop of fear and panic, knowing that I was going to have to go to the judge pretty soon. My lawyer was very helpful. He said, we're going to put a plan of action into place so that when you go before the judge, you have some recovery time under your belt. And let's figure out what that looks like for you. So, I keep wanting to do that. So we're going to talk a little bit more about survival mode. It is your brain operating at the lowest or base level. The normal state of your brain is what experts call learning mode. So this is when you and your brain are out to explore the world, you're having fun, you're freely and happily creating and interacting with the world. This is our normal state. So creativity cannot thrive when your brain is operating at the base level. Okay, I think I already said that. So as a writer, I love words, and thrive is actually my favorite word in our vocabulary. For me, it's true empowerment. So the definition of thrive is to prosper, be fortunate or successful, to grow or develop vigorously. That's also a fun word. I love that word. And a synonym of thrive is flourish. So as we go throughout this, the rest of this presentation, I want you guys to ask yourselves, are you thriving in your recovery, or are you merely surviving? And are the people that you're working in your prayer work, are they thriving? Or are they stuck in survival mode? And how can you, in the work that you do, help them flip the switch? And I'm hopefully, through my story that I'm going to share here in a minute, going to give you some ideas or inspiration on how you can do that. Before we go into that, we're going to talk real briefly about creativity. One definition is it's the ability to generate new ideas and new connections between ideas and ways to solve problems in any field or realm of our lives. The cool thing about us all having experienced trauma is that creativity can thrive in trauma if we understand how to utilize creative energy. So when you're broken down, you are forced, almost, right? It feels like that. You're forced to create a new life for yourself. It means you have to switch everything that you knew before and all of a sudden create something totally different. So it's a great opportunity for us to let our peers harness creativity when they're in that beginning stages of their recovery. So I hear a lot, I do creative workshops for people in recovery that are really focused on intuition and imagination and things like that. And I always hear, okay, well, I don't have a creative bone in my body. This is not going to work for me. But according to science, and I was thinking about Gail's presentation yesterday and how they had put creativity in the intellectual side of things. And I was thinking it might be because creativity, there you are, Gail. I was looking for you, okay. I was thinking about it. According to science, creativity is something that occurs in the brain. Even intuition occurs in the midbrain or the subconscious part of your brain. So therefore, if you think, you can create. I love this quote by Albert Einstein. He says, "I believe in intuition and inspiration. Imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited, whereas imagination embraces the entire world, stimulating progress, giving birth to evolution. It is, strictly speaking, a real factor in scientific research." Now, I hope that's not fake news, because you never know with these quotes online. I tried to go back, and I'm like, did he really say this, though? So forgive me if it is fake news. So the thing that I think is so cool, and I talk a lot about evidence-based because I'm a grant writer, and I know how important that is when you're trying to advocate for yourselves and your programs. We have to have evidence to back up our ideas. So I'm going to use a lot of evidence-based research in what I'm sharing with you now. So intuition is actually evidence-based. It used to be like, oh, it's the spiritual thing and you can't prove it, but it's actually proven to come from our midbrain. So scientists have discovered that humans appear to have two very different operating systems. System one is our quick, intellectual, and often subconscious way of operating, and it isn't controlled by the right brain or other parts of our brain that have been around since prehistoric times, known as the limbic and reptilian parts of our brain, which is very interesting, I think, anyways. The slower, more analytical part of our brain is system two. And what's interesting about this is they're doing a lot of studies on intuition. And they're finding, one study that I read that was really cool was they were putting people in rooms and having them play card games. And they were telling people to be vocal about their experience. In one room, they could only go with the system two, the analytical side, and make decisions, but tell them, oh, but my intuition is telling me to choose this card, or whatever it might be. And throughout those studies, they were finding that the people who, if they had followed their intuition, they would have got it right. I think it was like 82% more of the time. And so this intuition that we've developed through our evolution is really something that you need to consider. So creativity is an evidence-based wellness practice. I say this because I want you, if you can, when you're writing your grants and your proposals, is to find a way to insert creativity more into your peer work, and that you can find a lot of data on this to say, boom, SAMHSA, creativity is an evidence-based wellness practice. Ever heard of it? And they're going to go, oh, yeah, we have. So here are some of the things tapping into your creativity for improved mental health and wellness. There are many positive benefits: reducing stress and anxiety, increasing positive emotions, decreasing depressive symptoms. Just want to check the time here. Okay. Reducing distress and negative emotions, boosting the immune system, increasing self-esteem and feelings of accomplishment, increasing happiness, concentration, and focus. And these are all the things that I can actually say, this is my life story using creativity in my recovery path. And I'll show you that in what that looks like in somebody's recovery here in a minute. So the average person has 60,000 thoughts per day, and 95% of them are exactly the same day in and day out. That's so boring. Why are we not so bored of ourselves? Wow, that's crazy. So neuroscientists have been studying many forms of creativity and finding that activities like cooking, drawing, photography, art, music, cake decoration, crossword puzzles are beneficial to your health. When we are being creative, our brains release dopamine, which is a natural antidepressant. Okay. So now I'm going to start with my story and I'm going to say this really fast and not so you're not bored of this, but I'm going to tell you a story, which is a case study on creativity and recovery for health and well-being. Okay. And so like I said, let me just get on the right spot in my notes here. Okay. So like I said, I am from Salt Lake City, Utah. How many of you have been to Salt Lake City, Utah? Okay. Before I start this story, I really want to let you know that I am not trying to offend anybody with my experience or my perception of certain things, and that if you have an issue with anything I've said, please feel free to come get me after and let's have a conversation about it. Because I think that when we're talking about recovery, we're all protective of our own recovery. And my story and my experience doesn't invalidate your story or your experience or your beliefs at all. So I'm just hoping to open your mind and show you maybe a new or different way. So like I said, I grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah. In Salt Lake County, where I grew up, over half the population in Salt Lake County are Mormons. There are within, let's see, it's 740 square miles within the county I grew up. We had 500 members, 4 temples, 6 missions, 175 church houses, the Tabernacle Choir, the prophet lives there, most of his 12 apostles, and the Mormon headquarters. Utah's unique in America because it's the only state with a Mormon majority and the only state with a majority population, the majority of the population belonging to one single church. So this meant for me that because I grew up in a very strict religious Mormon family, this meant for me that my entire life was planned out for me from the moment I was born. So I was an infant right when I was born. I was blessed into the church. At 8 years, I was meant to be baptized and confirmed to receive the Holy Ghost. And at 12 years, I was expected to start participating in sacred temporal rituals, such as baptisms for the dead. And at 19, I was supposed to get ready to get married. Most of the Mormons in Utah marry between 19 and 21. And so we have to prepare to take out our endowments and wear our garments under our clothes for the rest of our lives. And then start getting prepared to do church callings, work within the church in genealogy, get married, have babies. Utah has the highest percentage of children per family. So it's an average of 4 to 6 children, and a lot of people I know have 8. My sister, who's 2 years older than me or a year older than me, she has 6 kids. So and then even in the afterlife, my life was planned out. If I had done everything right on earth, I was going to go to the celestial kingdom, and then I was going to get a planet so I could rule and become a god with my husband and his many, many wives, because there are not enough righteous men in heaven, and so this is why they believe in multiple marriages or polygamy. Oh, we're going to go back. So what's interesting about this is in Salt Lake, the culture is very unique. This is the rest of the religion throughout the U.S. isn't really like this. It's, when you have a lot of people living in the same place and believing the same ideas, and everybody's sort of maybe taking it to an extreme level. But I didn't really like any of these ideas. I didn't feel connected to them. They didn't really inspire me. When you grow up in certain things, you have interests in things, and things just kind of light you up, and I didn't have that for that. And not that there was anything wrong with that. In fact, most of my siblings and all of my neighbors and teachers and everybody, they loved this. We're taught that if we're born in Salt Lake City, Utah, we are the chosen ones. It's the headquarters of the church. We were chosen because we were the most righteous in the spiritual world, and that meant we had this great calling, and we couldn't stray from that. So while most of the people I knew thought that was amazing, and they took that on, and they were marching forward, and it was boom, I was like, no. I'm like, no, I don't want this. I don't want to get married. I don't want to be a mom, and I don't want to be a Mormon. I really had these wild ideas, and people were like, okay, well, that's weird. They were like, no, Shannon, this is how it is. You don't question this. This is where you belong. And unfortunately for my parents, I didn't want to be a doctor. I didn't want to be a ballerina or anything like a teacher. I wanted to be a pirate. And I'm serious about this. I wanted to be a pirate so badly. I thought they were the coolest thing ever. I thought, okay, well, I'm going to be a pirate, and I don't care what anybody says. I had my own little pirate crew. I had all my stuffed animals, and they were building a freeway behind our house. And as a kid, so the freeway was just this big, long dirt field for years, and they had all these materials for freeways that you don't even know are there, like these big spiral plastic things and huge things. And I would go out there, and I'm like, this is it. This is the land of treasure. We're gonna find the treasure, and we're gonna do this. And so I would go on these treasure hunts, and then I would write everything down, and I would document, okay, I found a spiral donk over here, and I found this, making up names for things, and I just felt really alive in this idea of being a pirate. So this went on, my pirate obsession went on for years until I was, so I started being able to be old enough to go to the library, get dropped off there, and I started reading more about pirates, and just really understanding, oh my gosh, they were in the Gold Coast of Africa and Somalia, and I became obsessed with Africa too. I thought, for some reason, I just felt really connected. I'm like, I want to go there, and I'm going to have a ship, and we're going to go down the Gold Coast. And then, I ended up becoming a teenager and started to realize, okay, well, pirates are really not that cool. They're actually really gross. They're actually totally gross. They have black stuff in their teeth, and they're criminals, and I just was like, that is so weird. Did I really have that obsession? It was embarrassing. But then I started to think about it, and I'm like, well, wait a minute. I spent all these years finding true joy in this idea. I had a feeling about an idea. What was that about? And I started to realize it wasn't really about being a pirate. It was more about travel, exploration, the idea of finding something of value and bringing it back. And I started to think, well, Africa was always on my #1 list. And so maybe this is a clue. Maybe all these things that I felt that my intuition was leading me to are clues that I need to pay attention to. And I knew from my reading and my research that there were many people around the world that traveled to Africa every day. It was a tangible dream. So I told my parents I don't remember how old I was, but I told them before I was 15 that I was going to go to Africa and this is what I was going to do when I grew up. And they were like, no, you are not going to Africa. Women do not travel to Africa. This is not going to happen. You belong here. You have a purpose. You're not to stray from it. And by the time I was 15, I really, I felt a lot of pressure to conform to the groupthink. I felt a lot of pressure to believe in this. And because I didn't feel connected to these ideas that they were preaching, I felt like something was wrong with me. And I started to turn in on myself. I started to really believe something was wrong with me. I started to go to counseling at 15. My parents told me I should go because something was wrong with me, because I wanted to go to Africa, which is kind of funny if you think about it. But so at 15, I said, okay, I'm going to conform. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do the Mormon thing. It wasn't worth having to battle it. I couldn't take on, 500,000 people in my community. But conforming was hard for me because I was wildly independent, and I knew how I felt inside. I knew what felt right for me. I felt it, and because I felt it, that meant something was wrong with me, because my feelings, I couldn't trust my feelings, and so I started using drugs and alcohol to cope at 15. Now, by the time I was 21, I had my first DUI. And that really scared me because I was in jail, and that was really scary for me. It was really embarrassing too. So I thought, okay, well, I'm going to try to sober up. And I ended up going to college, and I'm on and off using pills by now and different things like that. And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to go to college. And there I joined a service learning program, which allowed us to travel throughout the US. We got to go to New York and Hawaii, and that really did something for my self-esteem. It reminded me of my original dream of being a pirate and going to Africa. And when I traveled to Hawaii, and I'm in the ocean, and I'm in New York, I'm in Brooklyn, learning about the culture and the issues and how the community was responding, I just came alive. I thought, okay, I'm old enough now. I can do this. I can go to Africa. I'm going to do whatever I can to get there. So that's what I did. I won't go into all the details of how I ended up going to Africa, but it happened. So I ended up going to Sudan, which is actually 2 countries now. It's North and South Sudan. It's right below Egypt. And at the time that I went, it was listed as the 3rd most dangerous country in the world by Forbes magazine. And when I was doing the interview over the phone with this woman, because I was going to go over as a teacher, that's how I was going to get in, a 3rd grade teacher. I thought it was interesting. I didn't need any experience, she said, which is interesting. And they were going to pay for everything. They were going to pay for my plane ticket and give me room and board. And I'm like, and then the fact that it was listed as the 3rd most dangerous country in the world, I was like, boom, this is my place. I'm going there. It's going to be so exciting. And what really sealed the deal is the woman on the phone told me, listen, this country is governed by Sharia law, which means it's the strictest form of Islamic law. You cannot have alcohol or drugs here. If you're a party girl, you don't belong here. And I thought, this is going to help me sober up. I'll get off the pills. I'll get off, I'll go and I'm going to sober up and I'm going to have my dream. So I'm in there as a teacher, and but some interesting things started happening. Let's see, where things were just falling into my space. I was living with a roommate who was from New York, and she started working as a editor for a local English newspaper called the Sudan Vision. And she was like, do you know there's another English newspaper here called the Khartoum Monitor? You should go and see if you can write there. And I was also somebody who was an avid journalist and an avid writer. And I'll get into that a little bit more. But I thought, okay, so I went to the Khartoum Monitor and they hired me on the spot. I ended up editing all their newspapers, and then I would go the next day and get it on the street, and it would be exactly how it was before. They did not want me correcting their English, and I just would laugh. I'm like, this is hilarious. But so from that job, I ended up going to press conferences, meeting with the media there, and then I ended up getting hired by the United Nations to work as a freelance journalist, or a stringer is what they call it. From there I was flown to Kenya to get an official media training. And that was the sort of one of the most powerful moments in my life, because they took us to Kibera, which is a shanty town, or an HIV/AIDS slum is what they call it. So most of the people, hundreds of thousands living in this shanty town, have HIV or AIDS. And they're like, okay, we're gonna take you to this place, and you're gonna go and you're gonna interview these people, you're gonna do a story. And let me just get my notes up. And so you're gonna go and do a story and meet with some people there. And so I remember walking, well, first of all, so Kibera has just open sewer systems, and I had shown up in flip-flops, not even thinking. I was so green, I was so new. I'm like, what? And they're like, no, you can't go in there with those shoes. I had to go change my shoes, and then all of a sudden I'm walking towards a hill, and I remember seeing just a group of people in these bright fluorescent shirts that had a message on them. Oops, here are some of my press passes in Arabic. I thought those were cool. They speak Arabic over there. So here's a picture of Kibera, what it looks like. And let's see what we have next. This is what the message on their shirts said. It said, I'm HIV positive. I know, do you? And I just remember thinking, what is going on? And I got to interview these people and understand, okay, sorry. I always tear up right here. Their shirt said, I'm HIV positive, I know, do you? And I interviewed the women and the men there, and they basically said they were trying to start a movement. Sound familiar? Sorry. So they were trying to start a movement for their kids so they could educate. There were a lot of people that were infected with HIV and AIDS, and they were going around, these men mostly, maybe some women too, that were HIV positive, and they knew it, and they were still going around and raping people and having sex without condoms, and it was a cultural thing that you did there. It was your right as a man. But there were a lot of men and women in this movement wearing these shirts, and they were going door to door in their slums, and they were trying to educate and say, listen, we have to protect our children. We have to make changes. So I remember when I was doing that story and interviewing people, and I remember thinking again back to my dream to go to Africa. Like, I'm looking for hidden treasure as a kid, hoping to find it, and to me, this is what it was about. So after Africa, I did leave. I think I was there for about a little over 2 years, 2.5 years, and I ended up going to Darfur, writing about the genocide there, and like Jimmy talked about, really understanding that the media was just this machine that I didn't understand, I didn't agree with. They wanted us to, when I went to Darfur, we had a UN security briefing, and they said, hey, go into those fields. If you go in there and you get their faces and their names, they're going to be killed by the Janjaweed, or the government. So don't do that. Just get their quotes, get their stories, and then we'll do it that way. And I was with a friend who worked at the BBC, and I see him sneaking off and taking photos, and I'm like, what are you doing? And he's like, Shannon, without a name or a face, I can't sell the story. But without selling the story, nobody's going to know what's going on over here. And if nobody knows what's going on, nobody's going to be moved to get involved. And how do you win in that situation? I ended up leaving. At the height of, really, I had been making a name for myself. They wanted to send me everywhere. They wanted to send me to Somalia. I'm like, boom, this is a dream. But I was too broken down by that point. I needed to come back. So I came back. I had a dream to write a book about it. I ended up getting a literary agent in New York. I moved to New York, got another job writing for the UN, ended up staying there for several years, struggling with addiction. I lost the book contract because my agent said, Shannon, you're an alcoholic, and you cannot write this story right now. She said, you should go to counseling. I think she thought I was pretty messed up. So, this is me at my rock bottom, which we already talked about. So now we're going to go into my recovery process. So as I said, I had multiple DUIs. Oh, wow, okay. So multiple DUIs and looking at getting a felony, going to jail. And my lawyer, who was a family friend and an alcoholic in recovery, he said, Shannon, this is what we're going to do. We're going to put a plan of action into place. So when you go to court, and what his plan was to keep putting off the sentencing. He put it off for as long as he could until I got the DUI in January, and I think we went to court in August. So he kept pushing it off as long as he could, and he's like, the plan is for you to go to AA, and every day you need to get a signature. And then when you go to the judge, they'll say, okay, she's working on her recovery. I said, Rick, I can't do that. I can't go to AA because every time I went to a fellowship meeting in the past, I had been sentenced there on my second DUI, I relapse. For me, it reminds me of my strict religious upbringing, and not that it is that way, but it triggered my trauma because there were a lot of similarities. There was the idea of the group think, everybody following a certain format, which is fine. I had so much structure as a child that structure triggered me. So, and there's also a book, just like the Book of Mormon, and us in our scripture classes, a red pen or whatever. I mean, every time I would go, I literally had a bottle in my purse. I couldn't take it. So Rick said, okay, Shannon, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do for your recovery then? And I said, I have some ideas. I went and got counseling, but it was once a week. And when you're a new addict in recovery, you need constant support, right? So I'm going to tell you what I did using my imagination and creative writing to help me cope. How many of you guys have heard of mental imagery and visualization? Okay, so this is an evidence-based practice that they use in sports psychology all the time. It's a very real thing, a very powerful thing, and this is something that I had been doing in my early 20s. I used this process. I mean, by the time I started my recovery process was about, I had about 11 years of using this practice constantly. It was something that made me feel good. It was something that made me feel like I was a co-creator in my life, helped me understand who I was, what I wanted to be, where I wanted to go. I used this process to help me get to Africa. So what you do in mental imagery and visualization is you focus on your visual, motor, and kinesthetic. So there's 3 types of things that are involved in this. The first, you visualize what you want. And then you imagine yourself, the motor side of it, moving in, how you feel within your body. And then you imagine the feeling that you're having. And this is something that Michael Phelps says he attributes towards getting his 13 gold medals, or however many it is. It's all about imagination. So I would always, as a writer, first write down what I wanted to do. I want to go to Africa, and this is how I want to feel. Or in my recovery, I want to go towards the judge, and I want to feel peace. I want to feel an experience of compassion. I want to feel supportive of myself. I want to stand in my own skin and be able to own my journey. Okay? And and I'm not talking like just writing down for 5 minutes a day. I would do this for an hour a day, probably at the longest, maybe sometimes a little more, a little less. I would write it down, and then, this is the best part, then you have to, after you have your visualization down, you imagine it with your hand over your heart, and this is to help remind you to connect to your feeling place. When I was in Florida a couple weeks ago, I can't remember his name, but one of the leaders of the recovery movement said, we're in a quantum world now where people are understanding quantum physics and science and how that's matching up. And so this is the idea of also when you're holding your hand over your heart, connecting to that feeling place, you are generating what's it called? A wave? A vibe? No. A frequency? As you're generating this and practicing that better feeling place, then it's like a muscle. You're exercising a muscle that's helping you to understand how to think and feel and believe better, right? So hopefully that makes sense. So over the years, doing this practice for 11 years by the time I got in my recovery, I had so many notebooks. I mean, literally, I actually ended up throwing some of them out last year because I was like, this is crazy. I can't keep all these. I don't need to keep all these. I've lived this, you know? But writing it down. Writing is a wellness practice too that has a lot of evidence to back it up. It helps you reveal thinking patterns, to process overwhelming emotion in a healthy way, helps your relationships, improves your sense of well-being. I'm using this process to manifest this guy in my life right now. No, I'm just kidding. Another tool I used is cognitive restructuring. I would definitely say look that up to use in your peer programs. I only have 15 minutes left, so I'm going to kind of speed through this. Cognitive restructuring is a very powerful tool and something I've also used for the last many years. And then cosplay. Okay, so cosplay has, they're showing a lot of mental health benefits. Cosplay is costume and play, those two words smashed together. And there's actually a worldwide movement. People are doing this, basically dressing up as your favorite superhero or a character that inspires you and hanging out with your friends. So I started getting into this when I came to USERA, the recovery community organization in Utah. And we were doing a pride parade, and they said, will you be superheroes of recovery? And we're like, yes! And I showed up as Wonder Woman, and Wonder Woman became my theme. I've been Wonder Woman in Times Square in New York. Just had a lot of very fun and cool experiences. Did Edwina Scissorhands once. And then this photo over here on the right is me and my sister. My sister's actually the one in the white gown, and that's me as the Goblin King. Does anybody know that movie, Labyrinth? Okay. So I think what was interesting about the day that I dressed up as the Goblin King, or David Bowie, is we were having our family Halloween party, and my sister and I, this is our family movie. This is the thing we've watched hundreds of times, and when she started having kids, we showed it to all her kids, and everybody's like, you know, my niece is like 6, and she's like, I love the Goblin King, he's so cute. So we're like, okay, for the Halloween party, we're gonna get ready in private, like, you know, and then come down the stairs and show them our costume, the kids, and they're just gonna be so excited. So we spent hours and weeks planning these costumes and finding the perfect wig and all of these things. and had so much fun going through this creative process. And then when we walked down the stairs, I remember the kids, they're just like, "What are you doing? This is embarrassing." And they got up and left. And my sister and I were standing there like, what? So, I mean, I was really actually heartbroken that day. We were just like, oh my gosh, we're such losers. But I look back and I remember the creativity that gave us, that brought this amazing feeling, brought us together, helped us bond, got got us in a good feeling space. So since all of my DUI, I have published my book, No Tourists Allowed, which I was so proud of because it took me a long time to finally get there. And I've since been back to Africa, been able to do some work in Ghana for the recovery movement that they're trying to start there, which when I was able to go back and say, oh my gosh, I mean, now I'm here doing, spreading the message that of a personal story that I'm connected to. And I've since been able to use my writing to write grants. And I know a lot of people are like, grant writing is not creativity. And I'm like, yes, it is. There is so much creativity. You have, and when you think about your grants that you're writing, you really have to think about that program, if it gets funded, is like going to be on the leading edge. You either stay the same and we stay in our same structures and our same pockets, or you find innovation and you find new ways. I would really encourage you to dive into those grants and say, this is going to be something that promotes change. It's going to be a change agent. How can I do that? Research what other states are doing. The Hope Initiative. Oh my gosh, I was in that meeting. I hope that's the name of it, the Hope Initiative. I literally was crying in that meeting. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's innovation. So have fun with that. Have fun with your grants. They're a gift. And I would just want to go back and say, I have all of this today. I have my purpose and my passion and my way of serving. I'm not sponsoring people, but I'm serving through my writing. And I have it because I followed through with this one imaginative, intuitive, and independent idea that everybody thought was ridiculous. So I want to talk briefly about some gaps in the movement. And these are some things, again, I'm not trying to offend anybody, just think maybe you could look at it a little differently. But I went to a CCAR training, a peer recovery coach training in Connecticut a couple years ago. And I was the only one out of 40 people in the room that didn't do treatment or the fellowship. And so I was also the last one to get up. And so when I got up, I was actually really embarrassed and almost apologetic. I said, I guess my story is a little unique because creativity is my recovery path. And after that meeting, I had somebody chase me down and say, you need to know that you're not unique. If you want to stay strong in your recovery, you can never use that word again. Unique is an ego thing. And I'm like, but that's not true. According to science, it's in your DNA. You are unique. It's not an ego thing. And the reason why I point this out is because there are surprising facts that scientists are finding out about creativity. And one of my favorite ones is that they're finding that the most creatively satisfied or successful people in the world know they have something unique to contribute to this world. That they are unique, and whatever they create has value because only you can create it in just your way. They're also finding these other awesome facts, blah, blah, blah. Take a photo of this. Oh, one of my favorite is some of the best ideas are wildly ridiculed before they're revered. That is so true. So if you have a crazy idea and you put it on the back burner because you thought, well, because nobody's done it or it's stupid, trust me, it's something that's important. Your intuition is nudging you towards it for a reason. Follow it through. Another thing is that creatively satisfied people don't follow through with the group think. There's a saying that when people are following the group think, they're not thinking at all. And there's actually a lot of studies that say that being a part of a group think stifles creativity. Bad decisions are made because there is no opposition. Possible solutions might be overlooked, and funding opportunities are jeopardized. Think outside the box. Try to think for yourself, and promote that within your peers. Promote that within your peers. If they think differently than you, it's okay. We're not a threat to each other. My ideas do not invalidate your ideas. Another thing I hear all the time, and this is what I think people don't get for the most part. They say there's no way that you, as an addict who ended up in jail with a felony DUI, can use that same addicted brain to help you out. I am living proof that it can be done. And I guarantee all of you have done it too. The reason why I think this is important is because this idea that we have to have somebody constantly there pulling us out creates codependency. If we want our people to thrive, we have to give them the courage and the confidence to believe in the self. That you and you alone have the power to do this, or your higher power, whatever is comfortable for you. You and your higher power have the power to do this. If you're locked on an island trying to recover, do you think they can do it? Absolutely. They do not need somebody else on the phone. I'm not trying to offend anybody. I never had that. I never had somebody walking me through. I absolutely understand the value of that. I think we all have our own way, though. Peer supporting people one-on-one taxes me out. Writing grants to give $900,000 programs to create peer support specialists, I can do that all day. I love that. That, to me, it works for me. So the idea that you can't use your brain is an all-or-nothing type of thinking. And the reason why I point this out is because, think about it. Even in your addiction, I guarantee you used your brain for positive things. Even while I was an addict, I used my brain to help me get jobs. I used my brain to get me over to places I wanted to be, to learn how to write. I did a lot of things, even as an addict, that were positive, and that was using an addicted brain. So, just going to give you a quick call to action, and we're almost done here. So, our recovery movement needs new approaches to storytelling, fresh ideas around organizational structure and workflow, and bold experiments in revenue streams. Tapping into and investing in your creative talents and passions is good for you, and it's good for our community as a whole. So, I'm going to end on one thing here. How many of you guys know who this guy is? That's Tom Coderre. Jimmy, do you know what his title is now? I know he's moved all over the place. He's top dog, basically, over there in DC. And he's also a person in recovery. And I saw him whenever I was in Florida recently, and we were just laughing about this moment. I'm going to tell you about this in a minute. But he's like, you need to put that in your presentation. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's weird. And then as I left, I'm like, no, he's so right. This moment right here only exists because of creativity. So what had happened was we were at a recovery thing in DC a couple months ago, and we were taking those Capital bike share, the bikes that you can put and rent and like cruise around. And we were on the National Mall going from monument to monument. And we get to this place, and they were missing a bike. And we had enough for everybody in the group but one. And I ended up, because I'm trying to get my bike out and it was jammed or something. And we had to be somewhere urgently. We were like, had to get to the next monument. I don't remember what was going on exactly. And I'm like, oh, crap, I can run alongside you guys. I mean, it was far. And they're like, how are we going to do this? And I was like jokingly said, well, what if I jump on your handlebars? And Tom was like, yes, that's what we're going to do. And I'm like, no. I'm like, I thought, is he strong enough? I'm like looking at his muscles. I'm like, I haven't done this since I'm a kid. There's no way we're going to pull this off. And he's like, get on, we don't have time for this. Joking, but it was funny. So I hopped on his handlebars, and me being a person in media, of course, social media, I love, we're cruising down the National Mall, and I'm like, Tom, I'm going to take a selfie. He's like, don't you dare. And it's already wobbly, and I'm like, Tom, no, I can do this. And I'm trying to reach my phone, and I'm like, and we're like shaking, and he's just like, and I'm like, smile, and I take the selfie. And when I look back on that, this is what creativity feels like and looks like. It's innovative, it's spontaneous, it's fun, and it's risky as hell. But we have to do it if we want to thrive. Thank you so much. Thank you. Woo! Thanks for the dance off, you guys.
Shannon Egan.